Good evening. It is June 7th, 2026. This is James A Greig reading Chasing the Sun, written by Ryan Boog. Yes, 6/7/2026. Chapter 15. Trapped Flies. Mary Margaret and Letitia, 2 remaining out of 7, that was the math. Mary sat in a chair by the window. She was present but vacant. The singing had stopped entirely. She performed the functions of a mother, cooking, cleaning, dressing the children. Some essential light behind her eyes had dimmed. William came home from work. He stood in the doorway and took in the scene. The reduced family, the missing beds, his wife in the chair. He rested his hand on the doorframe. "Way out and play for a bit," he said to the children, gently. The children left. William approached Mary. He knelt in front of her. She did not look at him. "Mary." Nothing. "Mary, look at me." She did. Mary Boog stood without her armor. Her emotions showed, open and raw. She was not crying. She was past crying. Past the place where tears come from. She was a mother who had buried 5 children, and she was looking at her husband for a reason to keep breathing. "How many more?" she whispered. William had no answer. He put his forehead against her knee and held her. Her hand found the back of his head. They stayed like this in silence while the winter continued to take over the room. Broken, but still together. "You're the best mother any child could ask for." "How many more?" She barely got the words out. "Don't ye ever give up. We need you. You'll be fine. Just give it some time." "I don't need your encouragement. I need strength to stand up tomorrow." William did what he could. He came home from painting and cooked, badly. The potatoes were hard in the centers and broth tasted of nothing. But he put it on the table, served the children, and cleaned the dishes after. He swept the floors. He folded the washing clumsily. The creases all wrong, the shirts inside out. He did it anyway. Mary sat in her chair and watched him work through the domestic rituals that had always been hers. Her face changed. She was seeing him do something he had never done. Not for himself. For her. One evening, she stood up from the chair. William was at the stove, burning something. She walked over and took the spoon from his hand without a word. He stepped back. She stirred the pot and adjusted the heat and added a pinch of salt. She did not look at him. She did not need to. The act itself was the message. The next morning, she dressed the children. The morning after that, she went to the market. Slowly, in tiny increments, Mary returned to the surface of what used to be her life. The singing was still gone. Mary Margaret tried to match her father's resolve, though she was only 6 and her brother Austin had been in her whole world. She cried in the mornings, she cried at meals, she cried at night with her face pressed into the mattress so no one would hear. But Letitia always heard. Each time Letitia would slip across the gap between their sleeping spots and press herself against her sister's back, one arm draped over her, saying nothing. Just presence. Spring came, Mary gave birth again. The arrival was quick and unremarkable. Or as unremarkable as the arrival of new life could be in a house already haunted by so much death. A boy, John, named after the saint. William had his son who could carry on his name. William looked at the child. He should have felt the complicated joy from before, the dread mixed with hope. This time his face was different. It was protective, and the protection bordered on desperate. He looked at this boy as if he already knew he might lose him. Boston took no prisoners. Maybe his friend in Dublin was right. Tiredness had settled into Mary and would not leave. John, she said, after the saint. William nodded. He did not trust himself to speak. Three months later, Mary had already knew. She sat by the window and held John and rocked. Mary was not singing, because she had no songs left, just rocking the chair, runners creaking against the floor in the only prayer she had. When it was over, William looked at the ceiling. His mouth moved. No sound came. They had no sons left. John Boog died in the summer of 1875. He was 3 months old. The apartment was dark. The remaining children were asleep. Mary Margaret, Letitia, 2 out of 9 pregnancies. No sons, just another ex. Interlude. Grants Pass, Oregon, 1925. The office is quiet. William has been silent for nearly a minute. He is sitting in the aftermath of what he had just told. Hollis opens his mouth, closes it. His pen lies across the page at an angle. He picks up his water glass, sets it down without drinking. 6, he says. The word comes out flat. He did not intend it to sound that way. 6, William confirms. The way you say a street address or a price per gallon. Hollis has a daughter. She is 9. He tries to understand what William went through. He looks at the man across his desk and knows he understood nothing. He does not say any of this. He picks up his pen. Mr. Boog, if you need a moment. I do not need a moment. William's voice is not unkind. It is practical. Grief doesn't excuse you from lacing your boots up the next morning. It doesn't make your children who are still alive any less hungry. You get up. You go to work. You paint the wall in front of you. He adjusts his collar. That is not bravery, Mr. Hollis. That's just taking care of what's in front of you. The cloud passes. Light returns to the room. William looks at the desk and notices a tax assessment. An assessment. If you're not prepared for an unplanned expense, it can ruin you, William continues. But if you're lucky enough, an unplanned expense can make you consider your options. You were renting in Boston. You shouldn't have any assessments. I didn't. But an unplanned expense started a trajectory I never saw coming. Chapter 16, Irish Ghosts. Boston, 1876. A landlord stood in the doorway. He was neither cruel nor kind. He was a man who owned property and needed more money for it. Rent goes up the first of the month, $2 more. I have 4 children buried in this city. 3 in this building, William said. The landlord shifted his weight, uncomfortable but unmoved. I'm sorry for your trouble, Mr. Boog, but the cost of the building is what it is. William stared at him. Blinking was not an option. Get out. May the devil use your back as a ladder. The landlord left, muttering that he would be back shortly. William turned to Mary. I hear there's room in the West End, Garden Street. Others of ours own and gone there before us. Fine, Mary said, flat, automatic. She was packing before he finished the sentence. They had done this so many times that leaving was muscle memory. Garden Street Court, West End, half a mile from Prince Street, and a slight step up, though you had to squint to see the improvement. A narrow, dead-end alley tucked behind the main street, accessible through a passageway barely wide enough for a cart. Brick row houses, slightly better kept than Prince Street, a different cage. The court had its own economy. Miss Flanagan on the ground floor took in washing. A widow named Brennan kept chickens in a coop out back and sold eggs at 3 cents apiece. The children ran errands for pennies. And my children are running upstairs. All right, real life in action, you guys. In fair weather, the women sat outside the passage with their work in their laps. They shelled peas while the children chased each other in the dirt. The older women talked in Gaelic Irish when they did not want the children to understand. The younger ones spoke a hybrid English that belonged to neither country. Mary fell in with them quickly. She was a washer by trade and a mother by occupation, and both carried weight in Garden Street Court. She took in washing again. Her hands returned to the rhythm of wringing sheets. The calluses that had softened during the tenement years came back. She worked beside Miss Flanagan and shared the yard, and the two women wrung in tandem without speaking. Mary Margaret helped. She carried the folded wash to the lines and pinned each piece evenly. The garments hung spaced and square. Mary Margaret was still a young girl, eager to please. Miss Flanagan watched her and said to Mary that this one was born with her head screwed on straight. At night, the court went quiet. Gaslight from the street reached only the passage entrance. William sat on the back step and smoked a pipe he had bought for a nickel from a man in Hanover Street. The tobacco was cheap. He smoked because the act of it gave him something to do during the hours when his body was finished, but his mind was not. He could hear the harbor from here, the foghorns, the clank of chain against iron hull. The harbor never stopped working. Even at midnight, the docks were alive and men loading cargo under lantern light. He listened to the sounds and imagined the cost of passage back to Ireland. He was unsure if distance was a good bet or not. William carried the trunk through the passage. Mary followed with the children. The neighbors, Irish mostly, watched from windows and doorways. They recognized their own. A woman on the front step nodded at Mary. Mary nodded back. In this new phase of life in Boston, William threw himself into painting with a fury that bordered on self-punishment. Something was changing. He was not learning the trade anymore. He was mastering it. He mixed his own paint in the kitchen, linseed oil, white lead pigments, ground fine. He experimented with ratios and wrote notes on scraps of paper. Mary watched him from the bed. It was the first flicker of curiosity she had shown in months. He painted a church interior, standing on scaffolding alone in the vast space, his brush moving with precision and something close to grace. A priest watched from below, impressed. He visited a paint manufacturer, a small operation in a warehouse, and asked questions the owner had never been asked by a painter. How is it made? What makes it last? What makes it fail? The owner amused him, showed him. His notebook filled with pages of formulas, observations, and sketches. It was not the notebook of a laborer. It was the notebook of a man who understood how things work. He took on side jobs. A brownstone here, a shop facade there. He developed a reputation, the Irish painter on Garden Street who does clean work and does not overcharge. Referrals came. He stayed busy. Mary Margaret, now about 11, helped her father carry paint cans. She watched her father work with the same focus that young William once had. The Boston Common Room was thick with Irish. This is where they gathered and minded their own. William approached two painters. "Boog," he said, when the first man put out his hand. "William Boog." "Murphy? James Murphy? And me lad here is Flynn, though I'd not vouch for him in company." Flynn grinned over his cup. "Boog? Never heard of a Boog at all." "Most of the time I don't think anyone has. That'll change." "Isn't that the whole of why we crossed? To To make something of our names? Murphy leaned in. Yankees aren't making this easy in Boston. My landlord keeps on about his building and raising rent. He has enough cheek for a second arse, that one. Me brother-in-law's gone out to St. Paul in Minnesota country. Writes like the man's wandered into the garden itself, sky out past where God stopped painting it. And land so cheap, you'd have 10 acres for the price of a single room in this place. And free stiff and plain come Christmas, Flynn said. They say the cold out there'd kill a man standing and not stop to beg his pardon. Aye, they're building everywhere a man looks. Houses, barns, churches, the lot of it. William paused. How many painters out that way? Hardly a one worth the name, said Murphy. Half the lads going west are farmers, the rest chasing gold like Ejits their mothers raised. A man with a brush and wit to use it could make a fortune. Every house, every barn. And freeze the stones off himself in doing it, Flynn added. I'll keep my fortune in my warm bed, both. Thank ye kindly. They laughed. Every barn, you say? William turned a cup slow in his hands. You should have seen the first place we had. Door hanging off it, stuck open, no shifting. For love nor money. The missus was mortal afraid the neighbors think that we'd live in a barn. A short laugh. But a barn now. You'd marry well, boyo, said Murphy. And there's grand space out there to move. With nothing but the wide sky over your head and not a soul to crowd you. A barn. Something shifted under the word. I'd sleep true in one. Laying round in it, sky over it, and not one soul living. On the far side of the wall, telling me the rent's gone up again. Room, freedom, a few stinking animals. He tipped his head, and I don't mean only the four-legged sort. The men laughed easy and warm. Freedom, said Flynn. With froze stones and empty pockets to match. You're a madman entirely, Boog. And they laughed again. The whole warm room of them. William laughed too. His soul did not. Chapter 17, Westward, again. Minnesota? Minnesota, William said. Mary's hand stopped. William wasn't joking. His silence proved that. For a moment, her face was unreadable. It could have been fury or exhaustion, a distinction that William blurred at times like these. Oh, William, her voice carried the weight of 10 years and 5 graves. How far? Far enough to get away from this place. 1,000 miles, maybe more, by rail. And what'll ye do there? Paint, build, buy land, start my own business? I don't want to be working for some foreman, but myself. He leaned forward. Mary, I know the trade now. I know how the paint is made. I can charm anyone. I can do this. A long silence filled the room. Mary, you should know by now that we can accomplish whatever we set our minds upon. You said Boston would be different from Dublin. William's eyebrows went up. I was wrong. You said America would be different. It will be. Just not this America. Not the one crammed between brick walls where the water poisons children and the landlords bleed you dry. There's another one, Mary, west of here. Open. Wide. They say the sky doesn't end. Lots of Irishmen there. Mary put down her mending. She looked at him for a long time. The man who would not stop. William could easily be begging in the slums of South Dublin for a meal. He buried his children and got back up. This man who had looked at sunset over the Liffey had made a promise to follow it. She should have hated him for it. Maybe Mary should have screamed at him for dragging their family across the ocean and into the graveyard. She did not, because she had married him knowing exactly who he was. 6 of our babies are in the ground, William. Her voice was quiet, steady. It was not an argument. It was a fact delivered from a place beyond argument. I'll go anywhere you want to go, but I need you to know something. What? If we bury another child, she paused. Her voice had thinned. I know we need a son. Just can't bury another child. I just can't. William looked at his wife, the woman who had crossed an ocean pregnant, who had held dying children without flinching, who had built a home in every miserable room they had occupied. He nodded. I understand. I'll provide. He paused mid-sentence, his eyes darting around the room in thought. Then go find where the sun truly sets, William. Mary's voice was barely above a whisper. Find what you've been looking for. We'll be by your side. The same ritual. Bags packed, trunk loaded, children assembled. This time it was different. The family was smaller, 2 children instead of 8. The weight of absence was physically felt. William led them through the narrow court passage for the last time. A neighbor woman stood on her step, watching them go. She held up a hand. Mary held up hers. No words needed. The family stood on the platform at the Boston train station. A westbound train idled, breathing steam. Other passengers boarded, families and single men looking for work. A few with the haunted eyes of people running from something. William held the tickets. 4, not 10. He counted them anyway. Mary looked back toward the city, Boston, the place that had taken 4 of her children. She did not say goodbye. She turned her back on it and did not look again. Letitia looked up to William. Pa, where are we going? West. What's west? William looked at the sky. For the first time since Joseph died, something stirred in his face. Not hope exactly. He was too damaged for that. Something slower. Something more durable. Determination. The same force that had put him outside the bootmaker's door in the rain when he was 12 years old. Everything. Look over there, hon. We are going that direction. He lifted the trunk into the train. The children boarded. Mary took his hand on the steps, the same gesture from Stevens Street a lifetime ago. The train began to move. Boston slid past the windows. The brick, the narrow streets, the church spires, the graveyards, all of it falling away. William sat by the window. Mary leaned against him, eyes closed. The children settled. The train picked up speed, heading west. Fields replaced buildings, trees replaced brick. The sky gradually, impossibly opened. William pressed his hand flat against his breast pocket. Interlude, Grant Pass, Oregon. Hollis sets his pen down. That's quite a journey, Mr. Boog. He turns back through his notes. Double into Boston. 6 children lost, and still you kept your family together. Got them out that train. He paused. 2 children still with you, a wife, a trade, and the whole country ahead of you. He says it with a kind of reverence. He believes he is hearing the hard part of a story that ends well. Aye, yes. 2 children on that train, William says. He looks at Hollis. Mr. Hollis, you're writing a will, so I need you to understand who gets what and why. And I need you to understand the list of me children's names is longer than what I've told you so far. Longer? Longer. Hollis takes in a breath. Shoulders go up and down. His head does a brief disbelief shake. Eyebrows go up. He looks at William and shoots a small smile. Outside a train, whistle cuts through the afternoon. The sound reaches the office and hangs there, trailing west. William listens to it pass. We took the train 1,000 miles, it seems. Part 3. The St. Paul Ascent, 1878 to 1887. Chapter 18. The Open Sky. The train cut through the prairie and the world outside the window became something none of them had ever seen. Grass, miles of it, running to the horizon in every direction without a wall or a building or a chimney to break the line. The land so flat and the sky so wide that the two seemed to meet a seam stitched in gold. No alley, no rooftop, no scrap of gray overhead rationed between brick walls. Just a full, unchecked reach of a sky that went on until looking at it hurt. Letitia stared with her mouth open. Mary Margaret watched from her seat with her hands, eyebrows tense. She was old enough to see that all this space had no walls around it. Mary sat beside William. She had not spoken since the last town. A grain stop where a man had loaded sacks of flour onto the platform and the warm, dusty smell of it had filled the car. She was watching the sky. Her face had loosened. That was the only word for it. The way she held her shoulders, tight and forward, as if the world might strike at any time. All of it had gone slack, undone by the sheer amount of air on the other side of the glass. "You can breathe out here," she said quietly. William heard her. He turned from the window and looked at her face and saw something he had not seen since Dublin. Her eyes were wet from relief. He took her hand. He did not say anything. He could feel her pulse against his palm, steady and unhurried, and he sat with her in the silence while the prairie did not stop. The children fell asleep to the rocking of the car. Mary leaned against his shoulder. Her breathing slowed. The smell of coal smoke drifted in through the window seam, and beneath it, raw green scent of grass turned earth unfamiliar, too clean. William kept his eyes on the horizon. The sun was ahead of them, high and bright, and the train followed it west as if it were the only direction. The St. Paul Union Depot rose around them when they stepped off the train. Noise hit first, voices layered on voices, English and German, and Norwegian and Irish bouncing off the vaulted ceiling and mixing with the hiss of steam and the clang of luggage carts on the stone floor. The building smelled of cigar smoke and roasted peanuts and the sweet chemical bite of coal tar leaking from the rail yard beyond the platform. "St. Paul Globe! Get your morning paper! Custer Scouts reporting from the Black Hills! Fresh oysters, pickled tongue, hot coffee for the ride! Cigars, fine Havana, leaf, 2 for a dime! All aboard for the St. Paul and Pacific, stops at Anoka and St. Cloud!" A vendor near the entrance was frying sausage on a flat iron. Grease popped and spat. The smell reached the children before they reached the vendor. Letitia pulled at Mary's sleeve. She shook her head without looking down. William bought a copy of the St. Paul Globe from a boy working the platform. He folded it under his arm and steered the family through the crowd to a bench along the far wall where they could sit and take stock. Another vendor was selling trinkets and navigation gear. William bought a folded map, a compass, and a pocket watch that caught his eye, and held the compass a moment, turning it so the needle swung and settled. "Would you throw in the compass?" "No, that's fine quality, U.S. made." "I have grand plans for that compass. I'll paint you a sign for your business if it works so well. You'll wish you had done it sooner. The sign is worth 10 compasses. What do you say?" "Interesting proposition, sir. The answer is no. You'd have to pay for it. However, come back with the sign. If I like it, I will cut you a great deal. Does that work?" William continued to haggle over the compass with the broker. Finally, he gruffed, "I'll be back." He stomped off, and only the map in hand. While he was gone, Mary had walked to the vendor booth in the corner, and a local woman selling brooches and small jewelry laid out on a piece of dark cloth. Mary Margaret and Letitia followed. The brooches were nothing fine, tin and paste, a few pieces with chips of colored glass that caught the light. Mary Margaret touched one of them, a small oval with a red stone.
Ma, look it.
Your pa handles the money, and we've no business spending it on jewelry. Mary Margaret put the brooch down. She did not argue. Letitia walked away. Mary Margaret stood there another moment, looking. William came back with the paper. Mary Margaret took his hand and pointed at the brooch and smiled up at him and told him he was the finest pa there ever was. No, William said. He said it soft and stern. He walked away. Mary Margaret's face did not fall. She was a child who understood money. Mary lingered at the booth. She spoke quietly to the woman behind the cloth. A few coins passed between them. No one else saw. When Mary caught up with the family, she pressed the brooch into Mary Margaret's hand without a word. Mary Margaret closed her fist around it and looked at her mother. Mary looked straight ahead. William led the family through the depot and out onto the street. The air outside was cold and dry. It tasted faintly of wood smoke, a taste the children had never encountered. Not the chalky, sulfurous burn of Boston coal, but actual wood, pine and birch, burning in stoves across the city. The street beyond the depot was unpaved in places. Mud and gravel and wooden planks laid over the worst of the ruts. Wagons and horse-drawn streetcars filled the road. The streetcar bells clanged at every intersection, sharp and tuneless. William stood on the sidewalk holding the newspaper. He had not opened it yet. He looked north up the hill and then south toward the river. He could see construction on many blocks in both directions. The city was building itself fast and did not much care how it looked while it did it. He opened the paper. Wanted sections, job sections, for sale notices, where anyone could place an ad and reach the whole city for a few cents. Real estate, painters wanted. He ran his thumb down the columns and read fast. His lips moved. He folded the paper and looked at Mary. She was watching the depot crowd with careful, measuring eyes. Eyes that had seen too many new cities to be impressed by one more. I need to find us a place, he said. And I need to find a wee shop. In that order, William? In that order. He walked the city the next morning. He left Mary with the children in the rented room they had taken for the night, a boarding house near the depot. St. Paul sat on 2 levels. Down near the river, the rail yards and the coal smoke. The river valley contained tight rows of immigrant housing that looked familiar enough to close his throat. Up above, along a ridge called Summit Avenue, red sandstone mansions stood in a line where lumber money had planted itself. The higher you climbed, the bigger the house got. William stood in Lower Town and looked straight up the bluff. He had seen this arrangement before. Dublin had it. Boston had it. The poor on the flats, the powerful on the hill. The difference here was the space between them. In Dublin, that distance was measured in stairwells. In Boston, in city blocks. Here it was measured in miles. He passed a half-built cathedral. The scaffolding was enormous. William had never seen a cathedral that large. Stonemasons worked the face of it, their hammers sending chips of limestone into the air. A fine white dust covered everything within 50 feet. He walked east along 7th Street, running his hand along a storefront railing. The paint was peeling. He checked 2 more buildings on the same block. Shoddy work, or no work at all. He rubbed flaky paint between his fingers and let it fall. Every surface that needed a brush was a job wanting to be claimed. They found rooms on Ramsey Street, west of downtown. The house was nothing remarkable. Narrow stairs, low ceilings, other tenements on the floor above, but it was clean. The windows faced west. In the afternoons, the light came through with a warmth and directness that Boston's windows had never managed, a light that reached across the floor and touched the far wall and stayed there, unhurried, as if it had now nowhere else to be. Mary hung a curtain. She set the table. She arranged the kitchen in the order she had carried in her head through 3 cities and a crossing. Within a day, the room was theirs. That night, William stood at the kitchen window. The sky over St. Paul was enormous, wider than any sky he had known, deeper than seemed possible, its color draining from blue to a violet so dark it was nearly black at the top. He could see stars appearing in the east, while the west still held the last of the light. 2 skies at once. More room than he had ever been given. He waited for the old relief to come, the feeling of having outrun something. It did not come. The thing he was running from had bought a ticket, too. Chapter 19, Roots and Frost. Letitia managed the garden plot within a week of arriving. A square of packed dirt between the back steps and the alley fence, choked with weeds and broken glass. She cleared it with the kitchen fork in her bare hands. A neighbor woman gave her seeds and a twist of brown paper. Letitia pressed each one of them into the dirt with her thumb. By midsummer, the plot held basil and parsley, and a broad-leafed green the neighbor called sorrel. One row never sprouted at all. She knelt over it, as if will and prayers could make the seed thrive. She watered the rows from a cup each morning before the house woke. She was 9 years old, and she liked dirt. That was enough. One evening, she brought a handful of basil and a fistful of parsley through the back door and set them on the counter beside the stove. Mary was stirring a pot of broth with potatoes and the end of a salt pork joint she had gotten from the butcher on West 7th for 12 cents. The kitchen smelled of boiled meat and not much else. Mary picked up the basil. She held it to her nose. "And where did this come from?"
Out back. I grew it."
Mary looked at her daughter. Soil on her knees, sleeves rolled past the elbow, a smear of dirt on her chin she had not noticed. Mary tore the basil leaves from the stems and dropped them in the pot. She did the same with the parsley. She stirred once and put the lid on and said nothing. At dinner, William was still in his work clothes, paint on his forearms, a smear of white lead on his collar. Mary Margaret had set the table. She had placed the brooch from the depot on the collar of her dress, where it caught the lamplight each time she turned her head. Mary ladled the broth into the bowls. The smell had changed. The salt pork was still there, heavy and familiar, but now there was something else under it, something green and warm and sharp that none of them could place. William took a spoonful. He stopped. He looked at the bowl. "What's different?"
"Letitia grew herbs," Mary said, "out back."
The broth was thin, still poor people's food, still stretched to feed 5 from a pot meant for 3, but the basil had gotten into the fat of the pork and released something peppery and sweet that sat on the tongue after the broth went down. The parsley brightened it. The soup tasted like someone had cared about it. Mary Margaret ate slowly, tearing a piece of bread into small pieces and dipping each one. Letitia ate without comments. She did not look up to see if anyone had noticed what herbs had done. "Elbows," Mary said to William. He was a little excited about the flavor and forgot his manners. He moved them. Mary took a second helping. She did not often take seconds. She ate it standing at the stove with the ladle still in her hand, her back to the table, looking out the window at the last of the light. The Sisters of St. Joseph ran a school on the north side of the city. Mary had heard about it from a woman at the parish, and then again from the grocer's wife, and then a third time from a nun who stopped her on the street and complimented Letitia's posture. Mary brought it up at dinner on Tuesday. She set her spoon down and looked at William.
"The sisters can educate her, William. They have teachers, books, a proper classroom. We can be given her that."
William did not answer. He tore at a piece of bread and put it in his mouth and chewed slowly. "She's 10 years old," he said.
"She's 10 years old, and she can already read better than either of us. She reads the newspaper and the signs on the street. She read the entire immigration form at the Queenstown when she was 4. What are we to do with that all, William? Have her shell peas until she's married?"
William looked at his plate. Mary waited. She had learned that his silence came in 2 kinds. The first was the silence of a man building an argument. The second was the silence of a man who had already lost one. This was the second kind. She boards there?
She boards there.
William thought of his luck with raising kids. He didn't have to approve. The air around them knew the thing to do. In the morning, Mary packed a bag. The walk to the school took 40 minutes. William carried the bag. It was not heavy. Everything Letitia owned fit inside with room to spare. Mary walked on one side, Letitia on the other. Mary Margaret stayed home with Rose. Letitia did not ask questions. She walked with her hands at her sides and her chest chin level, the same composure she had carried through the immigration's clerk office in Queenstown. She was 4 then. She was 10 now. The stillness had not changed. The building was stone, a heavy front door, and none met them in the entrance hall, greeted Mary by name, and took the bag. William stood in the hall and looked out at the ceiling, high and clean and cool. It smelled of old wood and floor polish. He could hear girls' voices somewhere deep in the building, reciting something in unison. Mary knelt in front of Letitia. She smoothed her collar. She did not cry. She held her daughter's face between her hands and said something to her, quiet for William to hear. Letitia nodded once. William stepped forward. He had buried children. He had carried coffins so small they fit under one arm. But he had never watched a living one walk away from him. His hand went to her head. He held it there. He could feel the warmth of her scalp through her hair. "You be good," he said. His voice was steady. The rest of him was not. "Of course, Pa." He kissed his daughter and scruffed her hair. She turned and followed the nun down the hall. Her shoes tapped on the stone floor. She did not look back. She had been the first name on the manifest of the city of Paris. 4 years old and steady at the clerk's desk, she had always been the one who went first. William and Mary walked home. The bag was gone. The space between them where Letitia had walked was open now, filled with cold air and the sound of their own footsteps. Neither of them spoke. When they reached the house, William went to the back steps and sat down. The garden plot was still. The basil had gone to seed. Nobody had tended it in a week. Mary stood in the doorway behind him. She put her hand on his shoulder. He did not shrug it off. "It's the right thing, William." He nodded. The right thing was usually the hard thing. The cold came in November and did not leave until April. It was not weather, it was crime. The temperature dropped below zero and held there for days, then weeks. The number on the thermometer outside the hardware store on 7th Street sinking to figures William had never seen applied to air. The inside of the windows grew a skin of ice each morning that had scraped off with a putty knife. The glass beneath was so cold it burned his knuckles. William had painted houses in Boston through winters that cracked skin and stiffened brushes. Minnesota cold was a different thing. It had weight. It pressed against the walls of the house on Ramsey Street as if it were trying to get in, and some mornings it did, finding the gaps in the window frames and the space under the door and settling on the floor in currents so cold that children's bare feet left the boards in seconds. One January evening, William came home from a job site on the far side of the city. He stood in the kitchen doorway with his coat frozen stiff at the shoulders. His mustache held beads of ice. His eyebrows were white. The skin across his cheeks was the color of tallow. Mary looked at him from the stove. "You look like a snowman with a mustache." "I can't feel me hands." "Come here to me. Sit." She poured hot water into a basin and he lowered his hands in it. The warmth hit his skin and he drew a sharp breath through his teeth, a sound that came from somewhere deeper than discomfort. Mary stood behind him and pressed her palms flat against his shoulders. She could feel him shaking through the coat. She kept her hands there. The trembling took a long time to stop. When the color came back to his fingers, they were a raw pink, the nails still white at the edges. "You can't keep doing this," she said. "I can and I will." She did not argue. She poured the water out and refilled the basin warmer. Mary Margaret found her own terms with the cold. William built a sled from scrap lumber, rushed, imperfect, and crooked. Mary Margaret dragged it up a hill behind Ramsey Street and rode it down at a speed that belonged nowhere near a thing so quickly made. She came in at dusk with snow packed in her collar and her cheeks scoured red, and she did not complain of the cold the way William did. The neighborhood girls climbed the hill with her and came down screaming. She screamed the loudest. The winter that pressed against the walls of the house could not get into her.
The cold held through February, and into March it became a fact of existence. The family layered every piece of clothing they owned, and still the wind found its way to the skin. The stove burned day and night, and the wood pile shrank, and William split more in the yard with an axe he had borrowed from a neighbor. The blade ringing against the frozen grain of the logs, each stroke sending a crack across the alley that the cold air held and carried. Spring did not arrive gradually. One morning the snow was permanent and immovable, and the world was locked in the white from the ground to the eaves. The next morning water ran in the streets. The gutters overflowed. Icicles on the eaves dripped and thinned and fell in long, shattering pieces that broke on the steps below. The smell of thawed earth rose through the city, rich and dark and green. A smell the ground had been holding since October. Crocuses pushed through the mud in yards that had been buried for 5 months. The children went outside without coats and ran through the neighborhood with their arms out. Mary Margaret walked behind them, picking a clean path. Mary stood at the kitchen window and watched them go. The sky was doing something she had never seen in Dublin or Boston. It was not just wide, but also deep. The blue went up and up and up without interruption. No chimney smoke, no brick cutting the line. Just stacked color on color until it reached a place too far to call a ceiling. She opened the window. The air that came cold and clean and tasted of snowmelt and new wood from the construction 2 streets over. She leaned on still and breathed another long breath, a long, slow pull that filled her chest and pushed her shoulders down and let something loosen behind her ribs. The knot was still there. It would always be there. 6 names with marks beside them, stitched in her body in a place no amount of air could reach, but the sky above the city had room enough for all of it. There was space here for grief to sit beside everything else without swallowing the room. She stayed at the window and did not call the children back in. The evening meal could wait, and the washing and the 100 other things that filled her days. A knot remained in her chest. The spring air was on her face. She stood there, watching the sky go on wide, deep, indifferent, and beautiful. Each breath slowly loosening the knot by fractions. Sunday mornings, the family walked to church. The route from Ramsey Street took them past the commercial center of downtown and up the hill toward the cathedral. William walked at the front. Mary walked beside him with Rose on her hip. Mary Margaret followed. She had pinned her hair and pressed her dress and carried herself like a girl who understood the Sunday was a performance. The walk took 20 minutes. They passed the bakery on West 7th Street, where the smell of fresh bread pushed through the door and followed them for half a block. They passed the livery stable where the horses stood streaming in the cold morning air. They passed men reading newspapers on benches and women hanging washing on lines strung between porches. The city was restlessness. Lumber stacked at construction sites, brick dust settled on window ledges and brims of hats. St. Paul had been a town of 40,000 when the Boogs arrived. It would not stay that size for long. Poverty seemed less prominent here. William was content with their place on Ramsey Street. Ramsey sat close enough to downtown that he could walk to work in 10 minutes. Fair enough west to breathe. The rent was reasonable and the neighborhood was filled with tradesmen and their families. He could see the logic of the city from here. The commercial center clustered along the river, the residential streets fanning outward. Room to grow and build. That winter Mary grew quiet in a way William recognized. She held her belly when she thought no one was watching. She ate differently. She slept on her side with a pillow between her knees. William said nothing. He had watched this before, too many times. He did not ask because asking made it real, and real things in this family had a habit of ending badly. On the 4th of February, 1878, a midwife came to the room on Ramsey Street. William stood in the hall, rolling a pencil between his palms. The children waited in the next room. Then a cry. Mary held her, and something shifted in the room. The baby was different. This baby was the one born into the promise, not the wreckage. "Rosalind," Mary said, exhausted, but with a light in her eyes that had been absent for years. "Rose," William repeated. He touched the baby's hand. Rose gripped his finger, and for the first time that he could recall, William Boog cried, not dramatically, just 2 tears that tracked down his weathered face before he wiped them away with the back of his paint-stained hand. Mary saw it. She did not comment. She just reached up and touched his face briefly and then turned her attention back to the baby. Some things do not need words. That night, William sat at the table and unfolded the paper along the crease. The left half under Mary, George X, Joseph X, Austin X, Mary, Letitia, Teresa X, William X, John X. He wrote Rose beneath them, the ink still wet, and set the pencil down. He allowed himself to look at the 3 clean names: Mary, Margaret, Letitia, Rose. The names that had no mark after them, all daughters. He read past each X, past every boy that ground had taken back, and his thumb came to rest on the empty space after Rose's name. No mark. He held it there, as if a thumb pressed flat could keep it that way. He folded the paper, and his eyebrows lifted. Minnesota was not poisoning his children. William found his business partner through the trade. J.J. Williams was a local painter, established in the city, who knew the streets and customers but lacked William's charm, skill, and ambition. They recognized something useful in each other. Williams had the connections, Boog had the hands. They found a shop for $25.50 at a spot where several roads tangled together near 7th Street. The building was rough, wedged between a livery stable and a dry goods store. Cans of paint stacked along the walls, brushes hung on pegs, a work table covered in estimates. The smell of linseed oil settled into the wood within the first week and never left. Williams and Boog. The sign went up and Boog immediately stood on the sidewalk and looked at it. His name on a building in America. Not the first time he had seen his name in print, but the first time it meant ownership. Excerpt from the St. Paul Globe, April 1879. Painting, J.J. Williams, W.M. Boog. Removal, Williams and Boog, painters, corner 6th, 7th, and Franklin Streets, St. Paul, July 28. That evening they celebrated at Waldman's Saloon on West 7th. Boog asked for a Guinness and the barman laughed. "You're in Minnesota now, friend. Hams or Schmidt?" William sipped the hams. He asked the bartender, "What has it tasting like? Dog's piss." The bartender snorted back, "Better than that Irish bog water you boys live off of." They both grinned and laughed at each other. JJ and William posted for workers almost immediately. 2 painters wanted for steady employment. The ads ran in the Globe within the first month. Boog was not interested in building slowly. He had crossed an ocean and a continent with a family of 6 and $700. Slow was not available to him. Mary watched him leave before dawn and return after dark. She managed the house on Ramsey, the 3 children, and the 1,000 small emergencies that came with both. She did not complain. She had married a man who had ran toward things. Her job was to hold steady while he ran. The family ate dinner at the real table, not a shared tenement table or a borrowed surface. The children were loud and present. Mary served food. Mary Margaret said grace, brief and plain. William opened his eyes. He looked around the table at his living children and his wife, and for a moment he did not move. William showed Mary his notebook of estimates one evening. She turned through the pages and studied his numbers. She could read well enough by now. She had been reading since the tenements. What she did not know about mathematics, she compensated for with an instinct for fairness. "You estimated this man on Carroll $8, she said. "You estimated this woman on Dayton $12. The houses are nearly the same size." "The Dayton house has ornamental trim, 3 colors. The Carroll house is plain white. Plain white is fast work." "But the Carroll man is a judge. He could refer you to his friends. Sure there's something between 8 and 12 that accounts for the trim without losing your referral?" William looked at his wife. She was sitting at the table, and his notebook open, and his business spread in front of her, and she was negotiating his prices better than he had.
10, he said.
9.5? Leave him with the feeling he got a bargain. He will talk about you at dinner parties.
William picked up his pen and changed the number. Mary went back to her mending. Neither of them mentioned it again, but the Carroll Avenue judge did refer 3 neighbors within the month. The months turned, business grew. The small house on Ramsey filled with the sounds of a family settling into something that might be permanent. Rose took to her first steps in the kitchen while William was mixing paint in the next room. He heard Mary laugh and came through the doorway to find Rose standing on her own feet, wobbling one hand on the table leg. He watched her and his eyes tightened, his chest tightened. Pride and fear lived so close together in him they shared a wall. By summer, Mary was carrying on again. She did not announce it. She did not need to. William noticed the way she rested her hand against the small of her back while standing at the stove. She ate less at dinner now, more in the early morning. She had watched this 10 times now. His body knew the signs before his mind did. The labor came in the late hours. A midwife arrived. William stood at the far end of the hall. The children were put in the next room. He paced, stopped, paced again. The floorboards knew his weight by now. The midwife emerged from the bedroom. Her face told the story before her mouth did.
The baby didn't make it, Mr. Boog.
Her voice was gentle.
A boy. He was already gone.
William did not move. Behind the midwife, through the open door, he could see Mary lying in a bed with her face turned to the wall. My wife?
She'll recover. Physically, she's strong.
That word, physically. It hung in the air between them. William walked past the midwife into the bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed. Mary did not turn around. Mary. 7, she said to the wall. William understood. He did not need her to count. He'd been counting since Dublin, wanting her to know his pains. He adds, most were my sons. He regretted that instant the words left his mouth. William put his hand on her shoulder. She did not shrug it off. She did not lean into it either. She just let it rest there. Outside the window, the Minnesota sky was enormous and full of stars. Neither of them spoke again that night. Later, when Mary was asleep, William sat at the table with the paper unfolded. He held the pen over the list. The boy had no name, who was already gone when he arrived. Does a name with no life behind it deserve a place on the paper? Does an X follow a name that was never spoken? William set the pen down. He folded the paper without writing anything. Some losses are too tough, even for ink. Chapter 20, The Ascent. The partnership lasted nearly 4 years, which was about 3.5 longer than anyone would have guessed. Long enough for William to learn the city's rhythms, which neighborhoods were growing and which contractors cut corners, how to bid a job and how to close one. J.J. Williams was a good partner and a decent painter, but he had his eyes on the fire brigade and a seat on the city council. William was content to paint a few houses. Boog wanted to paint every house. The split was clean, a handshake and a nod and 2 men going in the direction they were always going to go. William found his own shop downtown. The space was narrow, wedged between a tobacconist and a printer. But it had a display window that faced the foot traffic, and that was what mattered. He stood on the sidewalk the first morning and watched the pedestrians pass. Hundreds of them. Every one a potential customer. Every one walking past a window with his name on it. He went inside and started mixing paint. The first thing he did was visit the offices of the St. Paul Globe. He walked in with his hat in his hand and his best coat on and asked to place an advertisement. The clerk looked him up and down. Paint stains still visible in the cuffs, faint smell of linseed oil that no amount of scrubbing could remove. "What's the text?" the clerk asked, pen ready. William had rehearsed this. He had written it on a scrap of paper the night before, crossed out half, rewritten it, crossed out more, until the words were as tight as a good coat of primer. "Calcimining and tinting. Then add my pricing details. It must say, all work guaranteed. Direct people to send postal cards or to leave orders at my shop.
The clerk wrote it down. How long do you want it to run?
Until I tell you to stop.
Excerpt from the St. Paul Globe, May 12, 1884. Calcimining, etc. Calcimining and tinting. Ceilings, $1 and upwards. Rooms, $2.50 and upwards. Tinting walls, 10% extra. Outside painting from 1 to 1.5 cents square foot. All work guaranteed. Send postcard or leave orders at shop. W. Boog, 58 West 10th Street, St. Paul. The advertisement ran through the summer and into the fall. William bought a copy of the paper the first morning it appeared and sat on a bench outside the shop. He turned to the page and read his own name in the print. For once, it was not a sign he had painted himself or a bid. It was a newspaper that strangers read at breakfast. He folded the page and put it in his coat and carried it there for a week before it fell apart at the creases. Then came the schoolhouse, a contract to paint the interior and exterior of a new school building on the west side. 3 other painters had submitted bids. William walked into the school board meeting in a clean shirt with his estimates written in careful hand on good paper. He carried 2 things the other bidders did not: paint samples he had mixed himself, and the absolute certainty that he knew more about the paint than anyone in the room. The board chairman, a thin man with spectacles and cautious demeanor of someone responsible for public money, studied the samples.
Mr. Boog, your bid is not the lowest.
No, sir, it is not.
Can you explain why we should pay more?
William leaned forward. He picked up one of the paint chips and held it toward the window light. This is what the lowest bid gets you. See the chalking along the edges? Cheap lead filler. It looks fine the day it dries. Give it 2 years and your building will look like it's sweating. You'll repaint it in 3. He set it down and picked up his own sample. This is my formula. I mixed it myself. Pure white lead, boiled linseed oil, the right amount of thinner. I can tell ye exactly what's in it because I put it there myself. This paint lasts. Your schoolhouse will still look new in 5 years. The children will see that every morning when they walk through the door, and it'll tell them that someone cared enough to do it right. The room was quiet. The chairman removed his spectacles and cleaned them on his vest. The other board members exchanged glances.
When can you start?
William painted the schoolhouse himself for the first 3 days, up on the scaffold before his crew arrived, laying the primer slow and even because the first coat was where the reputation lived. Then his men took over and he supervised, checking coverage, testing adhesion, running his thumb along every joint and corner. When it was done, he stood across the street and blinked once and admired. The crew grew. 2 painters became 4, then 6. William placed a new notice in the Globe. 6 men wanted for out-of-town employment. The line that formed outside his shop the following Monday stretched past the tobacconist next door. He stood in the doorway and looked at it. Men waiting to work for him. He had stood in lines like that himself, outside Doyle's shop, in the rain, his toolbox in his hand. He had walked the streets of Dublin looking for anyone who would let him swing a brush. Now the line came to his door. That Monday, William stood at the door and interviewed them one at a time. He looked at their hands, asked about their experience, tested their knowledge of materials. He was Doyle now. He hired 6, shook each man's hand, sent them away with instructions to report Monday morning. Shortly after, William applied for United States citizenship. The office was small. A flag stood in the corner. The clerk behind a desk, he had administered his oath to hundreds of men and would administer it 100 more. The clerk did not look up. William entered. He was already filling out the form. Country of origin? Ireland. Occupation? Painter. The clerk wrote it down. He slid the document across the desk and pointed to the line at the bottom. William picked up the pen. He had signed 100 documents, invoices, deeds, contracts, estimates. This was different. This was the line that said he belonged to a country that had given him work and land and a second chance,
A country that had poisoned his children with its water and buried 3 of them in its dirt. It was complicated, and he knew it. He signed W.M. A. Boog. William held it for a moment, tilting it toward the window light, his name in his own hand, on something issued by a government that now claimed him as its own. He nodded and slid it back for the clerk to sign it and file it. With a firm handshake, he was on his way. On the sidewalk, he paused. He had signed his name on something a government would keep in a cabinet. This was the first time a country had written his name back. Excerpt: William Boog's Naturalization Intent, October 1878. United States of America, State of Minnesota, County of Ramsey. The money accumulated, not fast, not dramatically, but slow, insistent, because he spent nothing he did not have to spend. Mary mended his work shirts until the fabric could hold no more thread. He packed his own lunch in a tin pail. He walked to job sites, even with heavy loads. He stored the coins in a lockbox, kept in his desk's bottom drawer. When it grew heavy, he took it out to the bank on Wabasha Street for deposits. While standing at the counter, with his hat in his hand, the teller counted the money and recorded the figure. As the number grew in the book, William watched and felt his chest expand. Summit Avenue. The words alone meant something in St. Paul. The mansions lining the ridge, the sandstone and the copper gutters, the carriage houses set back from the street. William signed his name on the lease for a paint shop halfway up the hill. 5 years earlier, his office had cost $25. This one cost more than $500. He had looked up at the ridge from the bluffs his first morning in the city, the sandstone mansions, the lots with rooms between them. It had seemed like another country then. The building sat close enough to the cathedral that he could hear the bells on Sunday, close enough to the big house that the men who owned them passed in his window on their way home. He mixed his first batch of paint in the new shop, and the smell of linseed, which smelled pungent and almost fishy, settled into the plaster within the hour. He stood in the doorway and looked out on the street. Senators, railroad men, lumber, money, they all needed their houses painted. Minnesota had changed his body. The underfed frame from Dublin was gone. Mary's cooking and the physical labor and the wild birds he shot in the brush country south of the city had thickened him through the shoulders and the chest. His upper lip had disappeared behind a mustache so full it preceded him into rooms. He wore a proper coat now, bowler hats and top hats, and boots that would have made Doyle weep with pride. He told Mary, "Handsome is as handsome does, in appearances and action." She rolled her eyes. William adjusted his hat in the hall, the mirror anyway. Picture of William Boog. This is William Boog, St. Paul, Minnesota. Date and age unknown. "7 years after arriving in St. Paul with $100 and a family of 4, William stood in a field called Bryant's Park and looked at the dirt beneath his feet. A developer named Bryant walked beside him. N.L. Bryant was in his 60s, broad and prosperous, with the easy confidence of someone who had gotten to the frontier first. "2 lots, Mr. Boog," Bryant said. "Prime position. You could build or you could hold and let the value come to you. You buy just one, you don't know who will live next to you. You buy both and you have options." William looked at the 2 patches of dirt and grass between Oxford and Chatsworth, on an avenue called Evergreen. He saw what Bryant saw: house, neighbors, a street that fills up, a community that grows around the investment. "I'll take both." He let his eyes run over the 2 lots. "You're a man who sees around corners, Mr. Boog," Bryant said, extending his hand. "I appreciate that in a buyer." They shook hands. William held the handshake a bit longer than necessary. He was thinking about the tenements on Stephen Street, the cracked window the furniture maker's shop showed through. He stood in American development now.
the dirt his own, bought with money his own hands had earned, and the boy at the window felt a long way off. The transfer closed in August of 1885. William stood in the middle of an empty lot, pointed at nothing, and saw everything. The barn goes here, the house behind it, garden on the side. You said barn first? Barn first. That's where the horses will go. The paint, the tools. We'll rent a grand shop in the town from the business. The family can sleep in the barn until the house is built. We've slept in worse. Mary looked at the children, looked at the empty lot, looked at this man standing in a field in Minnesota, pointing at air and seeing a future. Build the house first, William. I'll not have the children sleeping with paintbrushes for pillows. Barn first, house second, that's the order. The order is, your wife is telling you to build the house first. Children, would you like a horse of your own? Pa is going to get us a horse. You'd have to stay with him in the barn for a while. The children lit up. Mary did not appreciate having them used as leverage. William looked at her. She raised an eyebrow. He laughed. A full laugh from the chest, the kind they had not heard from him since Dublin. House first, then barn, then horse. William framed the structure alongside his builders. He was not just painting, he was hammering. His years in Boston had taught him more than brushstrokes. After the builders left for the day, Mary Margaret held boards while her father nailed them in place, the girl squinting against the sawdust, proud to be useful. The house went up first on Evergreen Ave, and 1 1/8 story, dwelling with 6 rooms. A real roof. Mary walked through the empty rooms and touched the walls. She opened a window, and the Minnesota air filled the space, clean and cold and alive. She closed her eyes and breathed. The barn followed. Rough-hewn and practical, the new boards still smelling of sap. A place to store paint and tools and equipment, the staging ground for whatever came next. 7 years in rented rooms on Ramsey Street. 7 years of watching William leave before dawn and come back after dark, of making a home out of whatever space she was given. And now this, a house and a barn, built by her husband's hands, on land he owned. The tenement girl from Dublin, standing in her own home in America. She did not say anything dramatic. She just put her hands on the windowsill and leaned into the light. An evening in late summer, Letitia was home from the sisters for the week. She and Mary sat on the back steps, shelling peas into a bowl between them. The sun was low. The shadows of the house and the barn stretched across the yard. Letitia worked quickly, her thumb splitting each pod along the seam, the peas dropping with the sound like a small rain on tin. Mary worked slower. Her hands knew the motion, but they did not rush it. Do you remember the harbor in Boston? Mary said. Letitia looked at her. The harbor? I went there once, on my own, weeks after we arrived. I walked to the end of the wharf and stood there looking east. I could not see Ireland, of course, just water, gray water and gulls. Letitia waited, a pea pod split in her hands. I was terrified, Letitia. Every time your father said we were going somewhere new, I was sick with it. My hand shook. I couldn't sleep in the night before we left Dublin. On the ship, I held your brother so tight, he cried. She dropped a handful of peas into the bowl. I stood on the wharf and I thought, I have come to the wrong place. I have let this man take me to the wrong place and I will never see home again. But you stayed, Letitia said. I stayed, and I bought an apple from a cart on the corner and I ate it standing in the street by myself. It was so sour my eyes watered. She smiled, not at the memory of the apple, but at the woman who had stood there eating it. That was the first time since we left Dublin that I did a thing just for myself. Letitia had stopped shelling. The bowl sat between them, half full. I wouldn't trade any of it, Mary said. Not the ship, not Boston, not the cold here that nearly killed your father every winter. I would not trade standing on that wharf or eating that apple or sitting on these steps with you now. She picked up another pod and split it. I was so afraid of everything change your father put in front of me, and every single change gave me something I could not have gotten by standing still. She did not look at Letitia when she said this. She looked at the garden, at the tomatoes bending their stakes, at the basil gone wild against the fence. Letitia looked at her mother's hands, still moving, still shelling peas, and she filed the words away. The light faded. They finished the peas in silence and went inside. William bought a horse and a carriage. The horse was a maroon, strong, well-kept animal, worth $100 by itself. He ran his hand along the horse's neck with the tenderness rarely shown from the mustachioed Irishman. He had grown up in a place where animals were for work, not for pride. The carriage was lighting on wheels, a smooth and effortless pull for the horse, whom he named Old Red. Handles of the carriage were thin but strong oak, making it easy for William to maneuver himself. "You and me are going to paint every house in this city, Old Red," he told the horse. "Are you ready to work hard?" Then he laughed at himself for talking to it. Old Red pulled a cart loaded with paint cans through the street of St. Paul. William sat on the bench with the reins in one hand as his hat tilted against the afternoon light. He tipped it to the women on the sidewalk. They smiled. He had become known here, the Irish painter with the good horse and the honest bid. Men called him Boog. Customers called him Old Reliable. They drove past the evergreen lots, past the house he had built on the barn beside it, past the window where Mary stood watching. She raised a hand. He raised his. The horse kept walking. The cart kept rattling. The sun was hours from settling, and William had 3 more houses to bid before dark. Chapter 21, Premonition. Old Red reared, snapped the hitching post, and bolted down the street. Oh, I think we're good. Actually, I'm getting the... okay. Alright. I think we're at a limit of preparation here, you guys. Much appreciated for hanging with us. Part of the joys of doing a live reading, I make a lot of mistakes, and it's cool. We're seeing how things are going here. Yeah, you know, we had the kids running around upstairs. Good stuff. All in fun. I think, let's take a look here. I was kind of the impression I might want to make up for a couple. Yeah, we'll do one more, and then that'll set up so good for the next one. 2, 4, and... I'm off screen, you guys can't quite see it. I'm looking at all the different chapters that we got coming up here. Yeah, let's do one more. Watch, this is a big one. And we're about 50% way through the book here now, so that's exciting. We are roughly halfway, and I hope you guys are just enjoying this story. All right. Got the green light. We're going to do one more chapter, you guys. Chapter 21, Premonition. Old Red reared, snapped the hitching post, and bolted down the street, dragging a section of post and the paint cart behind it. Cans tumbled and burst. White paint splattered across the road like something spilled from a wound. People scattered. Something had spooked Old Red. A slammed door. A rat. Nobody ever saw what it was. William heard the commotion from the ladder. He scrambled down, but by the time he reached the street, the horse was gone. He found it 3 blocks away. The animal had collapsed in a heap, tangled in a mess. The cart overturned. A crowd had gathered. A policeman kept them back. William pushed through. Old Red was down. A carriage had collided with the animal broadside. The full weight of it drove the handle of the carriage into the horse's flank. He lay on the cobblestones breathing in short, agonized breaths. A side caved in from the impact. Old Red died almost instantly. William knelt beside the animal. He put his hand on the horse's neck, the same gesture from the day he bought it. It held there for a moment, and when he knew the horse had passed away, he gave a few soft pats. He stood slowly, wiped his hands on his coat, and walked away from the crowd. Then he stomped the ground and flexed his chest, a brief burst of Irish temper that came and went like a match flaring in the wind. The event caused such a commotion that it ended up making the newspaper. The police and journalists caught the event and reported it in the St. Paul Globe. Excerpt from the St. Paul Globe, December 1886. A horse belonging to William Boog, away on Dayton Avenue yesterday, of the sleigh was forced into the animal's side, and it died in a few moments. The horse was valued at $100. Less than a year had passed. It was quiet evening at the house on the Evergreen Avenue. The children were settled. William sat at the kitchen table going over business accounts. Mary moved around the kitchen clearing dishes. William glanced up. Something caught his eye. William looked at Mary. Really looked at her for the first time in a while. Her midsection had grown. She was thicker through the middle. He sat down. His pen. Mary? A cautious smile formed on his face. She followed his gaze, looked down at herself, and there was a moment, brief and fragile, where she let herself smile too. A baby. After Rose, after the stillborn, after everything? Maybe. I wasn't going to say anything yet, she said, touching her belly. Not until I was sure. It could be good. William, a new start in a place. William walked slowly to her, put his hands on her shoulders, and looked at her face. She was in her 40s. Her body had carried 10 pregnancies. She should have been tired. She was tired. But the possibility of life had lit something in her that he had not seen since Dublin. It'll be grand, he said. I know it will. My son will come. He kissed her forehead. She leaned into him. They stood that way for a while. A week later, Mary sat at the table. She was larger now, her belly visibly swollen, but something was wrong. Her face was drawn. The skin over her belly had gone dark and discolored. Her ankles had thickened, puffy under the hem of her dress. Even sitting still, her breathing came labored. She winced, pressed a hand to her abdomen, a sharp pain, not the familiar rhythmic ache of pregnancy, but something different, deeper, constant. She shifted in her chair, trying to find a position that eased it. There was none. This isn't right, she said to herself. The pain is different. She knew the feel of carrying a child. She had done it 10 times. This was not that. The swelling was wrong, heavy, like water filling a bag rather than life growing inside her. And the pain did not come and go. It just sat there, a dull, permanent pressure that sharpened when she stood, when she breathed too deeply, when she tried to eat. She did not tell William. She went to bed and lay on her side, with her hand on her swollen belly, staring at the wall. But this time, she was not mourning a baby. She was mourning something she did not have for a name yet. She was certain another stillborn was on the way, if not something worse. William had buried this fear before. He did not say it. He watched the door and waited. A doctor came to the house. He was in his 50s, spectacled, carrying a worn leather bag. Mary lay in bed, propped against pillows. William stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands. The doctor examined her abdomen. He pressed. She winced. He moved his hands and pressed again. He tapped with 2 fingers, listening. The dull, flat sound of fluid where there should be none. The expression changed subtly, professionally, but Mary caught it. She had been reading faces in doctors' visits since Joseph died in Boston. This isn't good, is it? She said. The doctor stood from the bedside. He wiped his hands on a cloth slowly, the gesture of a man who needed an extra second before he spoke. Miss Boog, I believe what you're experiencing is a condition called ascites. It's a buildup of fluid in an abdomen, a great deal of fluid. It causes swelling and pain and difficulty breathing. It puts pressure on everything inside. Fluid? Mary said flat. Yes, it's not uncommon for women to believe it's a pregnancy. The presentation can appear similar. A long silence. Mary sat with her hands in her lap. She looked down at her swollen belly, the thing she had thought was life, the last gift her body might give. And it was not life. It was the opposite. Can you fix it? The doctor set his bag on the chair. He spoke carefully, as doctors of that era did. Men who had few tools and knew it. I can draw off some of the fluid. It would ease the pressure and the pain, but the fluid will return. Miss Boog, it always does. The underlying cause is something inside of you. It could be the heart or liver, and that I cannot treat. No one can. William stepped forward from the doorway. There must be something. A specialist? Someone in St. Paul or... Mr. Boog? The doctor turned to him. His voice was honest and unhurried. I will not give you false hope. The fluid is a symptom of something deeper, and we do not have the means to reach it. I can make your wife more comfortable. That is what I can do. The room went quiet. William looked at Mary. Mary looked at the doctor. She had the same look she'd worn in every tenement, beside every dying child. The look that said, do not waste my time with hope. Give me the truth. How long? She asked. A month, perhaps longer. I cannot say for certain. I'm sorry. Mary nodded. She adjusted the blanket over her lap and sat up straighter. Death had taken 5 of her children. It would not get her dignity. You're a very good doctor, William. We'll see you out. At the threshold, the doctor paused and spoke low, just for William. Keep her comfortable. When the fluid builds again, send for me. I'll come. William nodded. The doctor left. William stood in the hallway. He put a hand on the wall and leaned into it. His forehead against the plaster. The plaster was cool and damp. It gave slightly under his palm, the way tenement walls give. That same soft rot. And he was back on Prince Street for a moment, his hands flat against a wall in a building that was killing his children. He pulled his hand away and looked at it. Dry. Clean. A fine house on a fine street. He pressed his hand to the wall again, anyway. From the bedroom, the sound of Mary adjusting her blanket. A cough. Then nothing. This has been the reading, Chasing the Sun, written by Ryan Boog, read by James A. Greig. Thank you.